So we know by now from the History of Sexuality, Volume 1, that Michel Foucault is intensely interested in two things: power and discourse. In the Victorian era, new mechanisms of power are what took charge of the existence of humans and circumscribed, surveilled, codified, and classified their sexual bodies. This created an explosion of new knowledge about sexuality, which was then in turn funneled into discourse, which is how we create and code meaning. So, to start with power, let's briefly review a couple of key points that Foucault raises in his definition of the term. Power is not a unitary institution or force, nor is it a binary conception of the powerful people versus the powerless people. Consequently, there's no one place where power is centered, no evil headquarters of power, but instead force relations in a chain or system. To borrow a phrase from Patricia Hill Collins, we are all imbricated in matrices of power and domination. Power is relational, and power relations are multiple, mobile, and shifting. This description constitutes a postmodern reading of power as a concept because it rejects the notion of a capital P power that always subjugates some while always empowering others, because actually we pass in and out of these power spaces on the daily. So our first question, and get your pencils ready, is about power. Foucault notes that since the classical age, the West has undergone a very profound transformation of mechanisms of power. If sexuality is one area where these transformations of power are made visible, what are the others? Because Foucault largely points to localized, contingent, and shifting points of power, consider especially where local power relations were and are at work. To connect Foucault's power obsession with his discourse obsession, John Muckelbauer's On Reading Differently article provides an excellent hinge, because Muckelbauer hints at how we exert power as scholars through the ways that we read and critique texts. Two particular modes of interpretation, interrogating scholarship or attempting to engage in the one true reading of a theory, can represent an attempt to seize power over a text or one's colleagues, even though Foucault has already told us that power isn't something that we can seize or acquire, or share. Muckelbauer refers to this type of reading as reading programmatically, and notes that it is sometimes marked by keeping score of the problems or issues with the writer's work. As an alternative to programmatic reading, Muckelbauer offers productive reading, which instead aims to use the text as a springboard. Rather than arguing with the text, productive readers try to find something helpful in it that opens a path forward, an invitational space. There is some vulnerability in productive reading, because while programmatic reading does not allow wiggle room for the alteration of the reader's stance, productive reading does. You must remain open to the possibility of your viewpoint or definitions shifting. In this way, productive reading is inventive, because it creates both concepts and subjects. So for question 2, how might we apply the practice of productive reading to other potentially problematic areas of Foucault's text? For example, the rational biomedical characterization of scientia sexualis versus the apparent exoticization and orientalism of ars erotica. Instead of reading the history for its lack here, how might we respond to the questions of what does this do? Or how does this work? And for our final question, Muckelbauer ultimately connects this conversation about reading Foucault to pedagogy, asserting that different styles of engagement and productive reading can foster a classroom culture that values invention, experimentation, and provocation. Now, I don't want to be that conference audience member here who always has to bring the conversation back to first-year writing, but in what other ways can we incorporate Foucauldian frameworks into our classrooms? How might we use the ideas or questions in history of sexuality to frame lessons, conversations, assignments, activities, or themes?